Okay, cool. All right, we're rolling. Great. Thank you guys for coming. My name is Ariane Newton. I'm the Director of Programs at IPSL Global Institute at NUNM. And we have been setting up a series of webinars to share information with interested folks, anyone really, who wants to know what the different types of experiences people can have on an IPSL program, and just how flexible and customizable we are. But also just to share general knowledge and interesting things that are happening in the world of global adventure and everything. So we bring our past students on, and today we have Melissa Bolin, who is here to share with us a little bit about her research in Colombia. And I'll just do a quick intro and then send it over to Melissa, and it'll just be a really informal conversation. So I do know she has some different slides and things to share with you. And that's great. She'll have the ability to do that. But yeah, just be sure you pipe up if you have any questions, because we're here to really inform you and make it fun. So Melissa, she is back from our program in Colombia, both Medellin and Cartagena. And she spent the fall and winter of this past year really focusing on her research project. She's a global health graduate student, as well as a integrated medicine research graduate student at NUNM. And so one of her particular projects was thinking about how a particular population, and this is internally displaced women in Colombia, and their access or not access to traditional medicine and healing methodologies. And part of what she was able to do while in Colombia was to get connected with a shaman, and that's the title of the webinar, and that'll be just one aspect of what she'll be talking about as far as her experiences goes, which is really pretty awesome. So Melissa, you're up.
Hey everyone. Yeah, so my name is Melissa. I realize there's just a few of us, but I did as a guide, and so you guys can see some pictures. I'll put on a little bit of a PowerPoint here. So bear with me. I've been working, this is my third and final year at NUNM, and as Ariane said, it's the global health and the research program. So this was a really good opportunity for me to blend both of those together and get a chance to do some global health research, which especially in the time of the pandemic was not super easy to do. So I was very grateful for the opportunity to be able to actually realize some of that. Okay, let me get this going here. Okay, so these are all the pictures from around Medellin, Colombia, which is not the capital, but one of the largest cities up in the mountains. I love Colombia. I can't say enough how wonderful the nature is. The cities are beautiful. The people were lovely. This is a cool up here in the left-hand corner. It has like a gondola ferry that goes from the train, where Medellin has a major transit system, which is really they're renowned for. And then you can ride the gondola up to the mountains and stop off at neighborhoods up in the way, and then it ends at this natural park, which is really beautiful for internal and external tourism, but also it serves as a really good form of transportation for the people. I'm not sure if you can see, but in Medellin is very steep. It's in the Andes, so it's a valley with really steep mountains coming up on either side, which makes it fairly inaccessible to a lot of cars, even in a taxi. I mean, it's straight up and down. So this was a way for them to get increased accessibility to the upper or not echelons, the lower echelons of society that live higher up in the hills. Okay. So a little bit of background. I have traveled internationally before. I was in the Peace Corps in Nicaragua, and then I did ethnobotanical research in Ecuador. And that eventually led me to my interest in NUNM, trying to kind of mend those both worlds of plant-based science with global health. As I traveled, I learned that there's so many different ways to think about medicine that goes beyond my very narrow view of what I was pre-med at the time. So traditional, or not traditional, allopathic medicine. And that's kind of how I ended up on this track. This picture on the right here, I tried to stick in pictures wherever I could, so it's not really representative, but this is from the Comuna 13, which was Pablo Escobar's famous neighborhood that has now been revamped for a street art, and the entire neighborhood is now a tourism center where they do tours and youth-led groups that are trying to really change the environment of that neighborhood. And street art is huge in Colombia, and in Medellin in particular. You can't walk down hardly any streets without big murals, small murals, and everything in between. So for conducting research, just some tips is it's hard to choose a topic of interest. And once you find one, you got to explore a lot of your options and find out where's a hole, where's a gap in the information. And I had come across that IPSL had this program in Colombia. So through my other classes doing sort of research in their projects, I was kind of looking for a way that I could find an in to do something sort of interesting and that hasn't been done before. And that's how I came across that there was an actual need for more health access surveys done with marginalized populations. So this takes a lot of time, but then when you find a good opportunity, you got to jump on it. And that's kind of how, once I found out about the Colombia trip, I was like, okay, really focused my energy in that direction. So to start, we'll talk about the Medellin experience in Medellin, and this is the bulk of my actual research project, facilitated by IPSL. They have contacts with a foundation called Bien Humano, and they work with mostly domestic house workers, which are really common in Latin America and Colombia in particular, and just increasing their rights and rights of the family. And then another organization called UTRA-SD is specifically for house workers that are Afro-Colombian in origin. And a lot of these women are the displaced women. So those were where the majority of my study participants came from due to various geopolitical and drug wars. A lot of these women were displaced from the Pacific coastal regions and really all over into the major city centers. And it was really convenient since they had an organization and they already were interested in finding out this information on their own. So it was a really easy population to tap into, which was really lucky because displaced populations are traditionally really hard to study. So kind of already talked about the design. Then you have to make a proposal, and IRB approval is needed both through NUNM, and then IPSL has a great program where they do an international IRB, and that's just basically to protect everybody involved, including the study participants, which is really important for ethics with international research because there's a long history of exploitation and taking information and not giving anything back to those communities. So this is kind of a safeguard against those type of things. And then once in country, we did recruitment, and due to COVID, we had to really pivot on the spot, which was at first really intimidating, like, oh, this isn't going to work. How are we going to interview people when there's COVID? But with the help of Ariane and the leaders on the ground, we were able to find out leaders in that UTRA-SD, and they kind of worked as like they were working on the study and helped me distribute all the surveys. So that was really, really helpful. And it's just a kind of a nod to how flexibility is really important when traveling and working abroad, and how you have a totally set idea. I've been working on this program for a year and a half, and then you get in the country and there's a global pandemic, and you have to really be able to pivot when needed and know that like something will come out of it. So then we did the surveys, and we also did a one-on-one semi-structured interviews, and those were recorded. And right now I'm in the middle of doing data analysis, which is adding another level of complication due to the different languages. This is all in Spanish. I do speak Spanish, so all of that was conducted in Spanish. So we're translating, transcribing, and then pulling out key themes for the eventual analysis that will come. Okay, so the results I found to be really interesting and not completely expected. The women did feel discriminated against in the medical system and just general public life. Racism is rampant everywhere, and Colombia has a long history of not official but unofficial segregation of Afro-Colombian populations from the general population. That being said, they are now starting to make gains and fighting for their rights, and they haven't lost a lot of their or all of their traditional practices. They still use a lot of traditional plant-based medicines for mild to moderate symptoms, which is good because we don't, you always come in with a preconception of that either people use only plant-based medicine or they use allopathic medicine, and it was seemed like a really natural fitting of both. They were like, yeah, I mean, if I'm really sick, I'm going to go to the hospital. There's not a problem, of course. But, for things that are more mild or kind of chronic conditions, they'll favor at home. They actually even had a little remedy for COVID. They mixed elderberry, mint, and eucalyptus and honey, which turns out to be like scientifically actually really good for any sort of lung conditions. So that was interesting. And that's just what they felt was right and passed down from elders. They do have limited access to fresh herbs that they had previously used. So they're kind of pivoting and more experimenting with what they have locally. This picture here is an herb garden at Parque RV, which was at the top of that little gondola ride. It's like I'm not sure if it's a national park, but it's a refuge, and they have a little herb garden growing. And I think that was probably the most surprising thing to me, is how accepted that plant-based medicine was in Colombia. Just in general, everyone's like, oh yeah, they'll use it for pretty much everything, and not just the Afro-Colombian population, but just in general. There's plenty of little shops that sell herbs, and they do hold a special spot for that. That's in stark contrast to when I lived in Nicaragua. It was really frowned upon to even talk about herb or plant-based medicine as like witchcraft. And so that's kind of the preconception that I was going in with. And then when I got there, there was plant stores on every corner. And so it was pretty cool to see that is in the daily life of a lot of people. One other interesting result is that they did say that they would consult with their respective family, friend, or elders with an illness before going to the doctors, because then when they go to the doctors, if they mention that they've been doing all of these herbal treatments, there's kind of a mixed bag, but most people said that they felt that the doctors would just kind of brush them off or be like, don't do that. Why are you doing that? That doesn't work. And so they kind of would keep that to themselves, which also presents a danger depending on the plants that they're using. If they're having also prescription medications and they're not able to have that more open conversation, which I don't think is unique to Colombia. I think we have that a lot here as well. So it was really cool. It was a great experience. Overall, we got to complete all the surveys and interviews really quickly. They seemed pretty interested in the study and would be interested in expanding on that. I made a lot of potential future contacts, which is a really great thing for IPSL that they do, is they put you in contact with people that are actually working and doing things in the community. So it's up to you to kind of save those numbers and save those contacts. And a lot of people will send out or just give out the vibe like, oh, if you come back, I'll take you here. And don't be afraid to take people up on those comments. A lot of times they're meant sincerely as opposed to just a passing comment. And so they're really good opportunities. There were some difficulties obviously with COVID-19. And then there's a couple of hiccups regarding cultural norms around survey data and how to collect and how to compensate participants and helpers and things like that. But nothing that was insurmountable. And it's, again, a nod to just being flexible and working with what you have on the ground. This picture here is a town nearby called Guatapé. And as you can see, Colombians love color. This whole town is just painted in a bunch of different colors. And they have these little drawings. I'm not sure if you can see, but they're on the bottom of all the houses there. It's a really, right on all this big lake. It's really beautiful. Okay, now to the shaman part. So here's a map of Colombia. Medellin is here kind of in the center, west center in the mountains. And then I traveled from there up to this area, Cartagena and Santa Marta. And these is also a mountain peak here. And then there is a lot of indigenous communities in the Sierra Nevadas of Santa Marta, and this big mountain here. And so that's what these folks are from, is the Awaka tribe. And these are Mamos, and those are the traditional healers of the region. So our IPSL contacts in Cartagena put me in contact with one of the traditional healers from a tribe from this region. And it was really cool. This is him and I talking here in a mix of Spanish and indigenous language. So I'm going through this recording right now, trying to pick out what is actually being said, and it's outdoor and it's windy. So there's a lot of information there, but very friendly, and just the amount of knowledge that this person holds in their brain at one time is just insane. We're in the city center, not because of COVID, I couldn't go to the village, which he seemed really disappointed. He's like, I could take you around my town and show you every plant that's on the thing, on the property, and tell you what it does and show you how I make my medicines. And so I definitely would like to go back and do that. But just rattling them off, he's explaining plants to me and what they do and what they use them for. And there's just like a wealth of information in this one person. Unfortunately, there is a little bit of globalization, modernization of the tribe. So there's a balance between globalization and, higher standards of living for people, and then maintaining their cultural identity. And so they're working with that right now. He mentioned that his grandchildren, one of them is interested in becoming a healer. So they're doing, he's trying to get her back onto the tribal land and do more walkthroughs, and actually sitting with the plants for a long time and doing things like that. So it was just a really interesting perspective. And they also use plant medicine in the context of the more modern world, where I'm like, well, if you have XYZ, what do you do? He's like, I'll take an antibiotic. It's the fastest and it works the best. But in this case, I'll use, a combination of 6 different plants or something like that. So it's a really integrative way of using plant-based medicine, which I was maybe a little bit surprised by as well. There was also a really interesting conversation that we had about botanical medicine in the bigger global scope. Like there's the geopolitical climate trying to take over that land, and how that, and even climate change is pushing back the region where the plants normally grow. And then also this issue with medical tourism, which essentially, like, I was there doing a similar thing, but not partaking in any of the practices. There's a big trade for ayahuasca tourism. And depending on how you choose, your experience can really vary on the type of experience that you have and who's leading that. And I originally had a pretty pessimistic view of that, of like, foreigners are going down and exploiting this sacred medicine, although it is helping people in certain ways. Like, what is it doing to the communities that are traditionally using and harvesting this medicine? And are they encroaching on their land and things like that? And the shaman agreed, but also he has direct communication with the plants. Like, they believe that they are talking to these plants, and that the plants are the ones that actually lead them to healing. So a lot of times they'll be the ones that consume the ayahuasca while they're trying to heal another person. And he basically said, it's here for everybody. These are gifts from the earth. Everyone has a right to use them. It's just a matter of using them responsibly. And so I think that on the consumer edge, that comes back to us a little bit, to really choose if we want to partake in something like that, or hear about those things, that make sure you're not you're supporting the right communities and doing it in the right way instead of a more touristy kind of exploitative way. And then also that way so that those people generate funds. I mean, they still work off of the dollar also. So it's really helpful for those communities. This is just a side note. This picture is from the museum in Cartagena, and they had a long history. This is yerbetaria, which is like the kind of like a more spiritual, but use of herbs for sickness and then spiritual sicknesses. And then this was the when the conquistadors came over, they did not like that. And so this is like the remnants of what was found in a certain area, which I thought was really interesting. Yeah, and then we also went to this small town called Palenque, which is where the first slaves that were brought over in the Americas earned their freedom and made these little towns. And this is one of the autonomous towns that was formed. This man here does practice plant-based medicine, and this is their garden. And we got a chance to talk to them as well. And so it was a really cool experience seeing that. I mean, it has their problems also, but yeah, that's kind of just a brief rambling overview of a big project, but just to give you kind of a foundation of what I did. If you guys have any questions or if you'd like further explanations on certain things, now is the time, I guess.
That looks awesome, Melissa.
Thanks.
What a contrast from your time in Nicaragua to this time in Colombia.
Yeah, it was, honestly, that was really surprising. I still keep really close contact with my Nicaraguan friends. And so I definitely had that preconception in there, which I think is a North American preconception that Latin America is the same everywhere. And it is not the case at all. Very, very distinct cultures. And yeah.
My question is, did you speak Spanish before you went on this trip?
I did. I learned while I was in the Peace Corps because we were there for, I think, 2.5 years almost.
Wow.
So.
Awesome.
Which is helpful. I would say it's helpful to speak Spanish to get to that next level of intimacy with the people there, but it's not necessary, especially in bigger places like Medellin and Cartagena has a lot of tourism. There's a lot of people that speak English and like really educated and speak English really well. So I wouldn't say it's 100% required to speak Spanish, but it's helpful. Yeah, for sure.
Good to know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You think that, I'm sorry, Sarah, go ahead. Do you think that culturally it sends a message that to people that speak Spanish, if you also speak Spanish, do they receive you in a more positive way if you're more adept at their language, I guess, than not?
I think for the average person, it's more of a surprise. I mean, I'm a very pale white person, and so it's a more of a surprise, and it kind of opens that door of intrigue, like, oh, like how, let me learn a little bit more.
Right.
And then I have experience though when I was first learning Spanish, or have friends that have talked about traveling also, is that if you are just learning and just starting and you take the effort to use your Spanish and talk to people, that also is viewed very positively down in Colombia and in Central America too, are the places I can speak to, that they're like, you're trying, that's good. And then it's kind of fun for them to be like, oh yeah, okay, you know, some things, let's see how much you know, type thing. But I think especially like for work and professionally, or even as on a trip like this, it was definitely beneficial to get to that next level of like, no, this is what I'm actually trying to get from you, type thing. And for the study wise.
Yeah. I'm always intrigued about that because that's a big part of what IPSL tries to facilitate is language learning, and I'm really terrible at it. So, so I'm always interested in what people's perceptions are about how do they use their language around the world. So, but I did have a specific question, Melissa, about You mentioned, there was one slide you mentioned around cultural norms in speaking with displaced women and doing those surveys with them. And I do know about the little hiccup you had around the compensation.
Mhm.
But did you find that there was any other resistance or any kind of minor roadblock that came into play that was of a cultural nature when you were doing your research?
Yeah, I would say for the interviews, it was person by person. I had some individuals that were super open and loving and caring and just wanted to talk to me. And so that was really nice. Others were more timid. And then I think others, and now that I've done a little bit more research, I could put them in context to they were more higher up in the organization, but still participating in my research as a participant. So, and I wasn't aware of that they were the ex-president of the organization and stuff. And so I was talking really technical and high level, and I wasn't aware of their position. So I feel like there was a moment of her pushing back against me, like, no, you listen, and like trying to say what she wanted to say versus the questions I was asking her.
Mhm.
Which I think you can run into with surveys, but I always try to be really careful to not have a sort of top down mentality, like
Mhm.
I'm a gringa and I know more or something like
Sure.
that. Cause I think unfortunately I often even get treated by that like people, and I have to be like, no, I'm not a doctor, you know more than me. That's not the case or anything. But I would say that was the most tension I felt, especially because these are Afro-Colombian women's and they're in the middle of their own Black Lives Matter
Right.
kind of movement there also, and talking to me about those struggles. And I was like, I mean, I can see it. I understand what you're saying, but that's not my experience. So I can't talk. I don't want to be the one to talk to that. Like, this is your, type of thing. Um, so that there's one interview in particular that got there was a little bit of tension there until I just kind of let her, I feel like she wanted to say what she wanted to say, and then I could get around to the questions that were actually related to my study. Which
Yeah.
is a lesson for me to be, and that's the beauty of semi-structured interviews, is that you're allowed a little bit more freedom.
Mhm.
But to allow that flexibility and not be like, no, that's not the question I'm trying to ask you, and just like,
Yeah.
okay, but take it for the ride, because there's a lot of good information in there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. It's always tricky in any sort of communication or interaction around power dynamics and imbalances,
Mhm.
and especially when you're speaking with populations that have been traditionally really marginalized and very, treated really poorly.
Mhm.
And they're finding their voice, and they're like, I want to tell you.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, that's what the experience was for sure.
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah. Oh, we have another person joining us, Carol. Hi, Carol. She's here.
Maybe.
Does anyone else have any questions for Melissa? I have a bazillion questions, but I'm not going to dominate. So
Great.
I really appreciate the pictures. It's very visual and really, really great to understand.
Oh, thanks. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what the quality is. I just got a new phone, and seeing the difference between those and the new ones, I'm like, oh yeah.
Oh, it could be so much better.
This is so
I have a question about Palenque because I didn't go there when I was there.
yeah.
So it's sort of a free autonomous community,
Mhm.
and that grew out of the sort of slave trade situation. Do you know when they became sort of an autonomous community?
Oh, I should know this. I think it was like 18, No, it was even earlier. I don't know is the short answer,
Yeah.
but I
So-
think they were the very first ones. I think it's
Mhm.
either late 17, early 1800s.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so a long time ago. That's really interesting. Yeah. There's in Cartagena, there's so much to learn about that particular aspect of how people, were moved around the world, and it was the first port into the Americas. I
Mhm.
believe Cartagena was the first slave port into the Americas. So
Yeah, I think it
Yeah.
is too. And I'm not sure if that's something that the general US public realizes, is that the slave trade in South America as well, and that there is this whole, along the banana line or whatever they call it, how that really impacts those nations. I know Ecuador has a big Afro population on the Pacific coast as well, and like those dynamics are still very prevalent, just kind of how we're having that same tension today here, that there's still going on in other places too.
Mhm. Yeah. How far along are you in your analysis of your research?
Oh, just getting started. I finally got the information into Deduce, which is the program I'm using. And so I'm gonna do it in Spanish first and then translate the results after that. I think because I don't want to mistranslate and then have things miscoded. So coding off, they do Spanish work, but they don't translate after. So I will have to have either personally or have a third party do that.
Yeah. I can't wait to hear what you found out.
Yeah,
And
me too.
yeah.
I'm just, to be honest, with my other, now that my other thesis is gone and I'm finally getting my head back in to this information. And it's really, every time I listen to it, I'm like, oh, this is really, it's surprising how just meeting someone for the first time, essentially, how open they were with me and how like candid, and that, telling really personal stories to someone that they just met. It seemed like that they wanted to share it and that they wanted to like kind of explain and get things off their chest a little bit. And I was a little bit surprised. There were some younger ones that were very shy and they were like 5-minute long interviews, and then other ones that were like 30-minute long because they were just going for it, which is cool.
Yeah. Yeah. We had some prior research in Colombia through Bien Humano that a series of students worked on we have a program called advocacy research and sponsored research. So it's research that the Bien Humano wanted to conduct and our students were helping. And they had an interesting experience that mimics what you just said, Melissa, where they were speaking with domestic workers that were, really it was just about like trying to understand if they even knew about their employment rights, which are completely abused in that system. And so they were doing anonymous surveys, and they weren't, there was like no names involved here. And yet when the women were talking to them, they were like, yes, tell my name, give my name out there. Like, I want my story. You can talk about it. And I want to tell you. And, I don't want to be anonymous. So.
Yeah, I definitely had a couple of a similar experiences. And at the end, they're like, let's all take a picture. And I want you to like, put this in your presentation. And I was like, I can't, I said it's anonymous. Like, I'm trying to, and they're just like, kind of a similar, like, no, we're trying to put this out in the open. I'm like, oh, okay, for next time.
Yeah. It's interesting how when you just start to get a voice, like people are recognizing that you are an autonomous being that has a voice, you're like, I'm going to tell my story and you're going to listen. Yeah.
So I have a question about the plant cultivation.
Yeah.
You were talking about how some herbs are not that accessible to people. I'm a big fan of permaculture and organic agriculture. And I'm just curious as to what the vibe was like there about organics, or if you heard anybody practicing permaculture.
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure if this particular group of women did that. They did mention that when they didn't have access to herbs, there was a couple of them that had patios or knew someone that was growing. I'm not sure the exact process they went through, but close to the apartment I lived in, there's this great organic, vegan, vegetarian, options, not completely. They eat a lot of meat down there. And they partnered with a local organic farm, and it's a co-op between a bunch of farmers where they were teaching permaculture. And they had every Saturday they would bring in their crops, and like a little farmers market at this little place. And so it's happening, and there's a lot of awareness around organics, and the water supply is a really big issue in Colombia right now, and protecting that water supply. So there is movements. It's a super modern city, and I wouldn't say completely across the board they're doing that, but there is like a lot of interest in that.
Mm-hmm.
And they made really good food. They're really good at cooking down there.
That's all good to hear. Wonderful.
Yeah. Were you familiar with most of the plants that they were talking about?
A lot of them are the similar ones that we use here. I do need to do some work, and I'm thinking about reaching back out to some contacts down there, because a lot of them used street names that I thought I knew what they were talking about, but they are not, I don't think, the right plants based on what they were saying. So I need to do a little bit more investigating. But yeah, a lot of them are the same, like elderberry, mint.
Mm-hmm.
They use a lot of green tea. Sangre de grado is a tree resin.
Mm-hmm.
They use that for healing properties a lot, which is really common in all throughout Latin America, I think. Maybe just South America. I wouldn't say that they use quite a variety like they do like in Peru, where they have a little bit more of the staples that they use. But a lot of them are the same that we use here.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if no one has any other questions, I think we'll wrap it up. And if you'd like to have the recording, be sure and let me know, and we'll send that to you. And Melissa, you're good with them having the slides and all that, right?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Very well. Very good. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Melissa. It was really great to see you and hear all about what you were doing. And maybe you can do another one for us at some point.
I hope so. Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah. Okay.
Very
Bye, Sarah.
inspiring.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.